Trooper Roby was a young man who was 24 years of age. While he had not received a complete education, he understood that there were many things in this world which he did not know. Therefore, humans, I have returned. Truly you have indulged yourselves while I was healing the wounds which the Sorcerer King left on me. As the angry roar reverberated through the core of his body, Roby pissed himself. He could no longer feel his soaked pants sticking to his skin. After realizing the power of the monster before him, he had a premonition that he was about to die, and so his survival instincts went into overdrive. They abandoned his useless senses and swiftly searched for a way to survive. However, before they could find anything, Jaldabaoth unleashed his power. Die. Burn to ash in the flames of wrath. Fire roared up, and a wave of heat struck Roby in the face. The incredible heat dried his eyes out and filled him with incredible pain. The hot air entering his lungs felt like it was about to set his entire body on fire from the inside. In fact, that was exactly what had happened. Flames scorched his skin and its water content evaporated. His dermis burned, and then the fat beneath, followed by his muscles and then his nerves. Where the subdermal layers of fat were thin, such as on the arms, the flames immediately reached the muscles and nerves. This should have caused the muscles to contract and make him take up a bizarre pose. However, the high temperatures seared his skin to his armor, which prevented that. His clothes, skin, muscles and the fat of his belly all caught fire, and his innards poured out intact. Human bodies contained a lot of water. That was why it took time for their insides to burn. If this were an ordinary fire, the flames would have continued burning inside the body for some time, but since Jaldabaoth's fiery aura was magically generated heat, it vanished as he moved away. Therefore, Roby's scattered guts were not discolored by the heat, and remained a pretty pink color. The sight of piles of scorched bodies and the fresh offal peeking out through oceans of blood were enough to make onlookers want to throw up. It looked like hell on earth. Jaldabaoth left Roby, who had sprouted a garland of fresh innards, and over 50 other scorched corpses around him as he walked forward. Jaldabaoth, the newly summoned evil Lord of Wrath, was walking. Even that was enough to kill the people around him who were caught up in his fiery aura. Get lost. Out of my way. While several such shouts could be heard, the first to scream was militiaman Francisc. He thought, why am I so unlucky every day? Thanks to the Holy Kingdom's system of conscription, everyone had to do their national service and join the army. Indeed, even the son of a great merchant like himself, a man with a bright future promised to him, was no exception. Granted, his father had paid the appropriate bribes to have him assigned to a slack unit, but the life of a soldier was still miserable. And just as that misery was about to end, this war had broken out. Not a day went by when he did not complain about his unhappiness and the unfairness of it all. Still, it would all be over soon, and he could go back to being the heir of a big merchant family, and indulge in the money-making activities he so enjoyed. Things were just a little bit away from turning out like that. It had been just a little bit. However, he was now fleeing desperately from the monster in front of him. If it caught him, he would certainly die. He desperately moved his legs, which refused to listen to him owing to his fear. He was surrounded by other people who were also fleeing like himself. Thus he made little progress despite his panic. In particular, the fat man in front of Francisc was an eyesore. Therefore, Francisc shoved the man away. He did it to get just a single step further away from that monster. He did it for the sake of his joyous future. However, as he shoved the other man away, Francisc saw that the people in front of him also had the same idea. If the man who had been shoved away collided with the people in front of him, it was very likely that they would collapse en masse like dominoes. In fact, that was exactly what had happened to the people in front of Francisc. Perhaps if it was just one or two people, he could have avoided them. Perhaps he could have jumped over them. However, Francisc was not athletic enough to avoid a huge mass of falling people at once. He collapsed onto the mass of people. He thrashed around to get up, but he was not given the time for that. The aura of fire centered on Jaldabaoth had caught up to him. Francisc had no time to scream. Why me, he thought, and then said thought was instantly swallowed up by the sheerest agony, and all he could feel was pain. Francisc had been lucky. That was because he had died immediately. Jaldabaoth did not stop moving. He trampled blackened human corpses underfoot as he walked on, like he was in an empty wasteland. Run away. Run away. One man shouted the obvious. His name was Trooper Golka. He was a man who had faith in his sword skills. That was why he had the courage to shout those words in front of Jaldabaoth. Still, that was just foolhardiness, because Jaldabaoth changed course towards Golka. There was no telling if he had piqued Jaldabaoth's interest, or because it had been mere coincidence. Well, that was a godsend to the ones Jaldabaoth had been chasing. It was the foulest luck imaginable to the ones on Jaldabaoth's new course. Golka saw that it would be very difficult to flee the monster amidst the chaos, and so he drew his sword. The monster's eyes shifted, and less than a second later, he walked past Golka. That was what the monster thought of Golka. He was only worth a single glance. Golka bellowed and ran in the opposite direction of the flow of humanity. The sight of charred people collapsing nearby was very scary, but perhaps there might be some hope for him. Perhaps he might hope to be able to reach that monster. Gulka learned the answer with his body. Pain filled him, he could not possibly close in on that monster. Gulka burned with the other troopers who were weaker than him. Gulka realized something. To that monster, Gulka was no different from the civilians around him. If only I had run, he lamented, before that thought was drowned out by the agony of being burned alive. Gulka collapsed with a silent scream, contorting on the ground like all the corpses around him. Jaldabaoth had no aim in mind as he walked. However, if humans tried to run, he pursued them. Stay away. She ran. Viviana, who had joined the campaign as a divine magic caster, was running for her life. Her long blonde hair swayed wildly as she fled with all her might. She had no time to wipe away her snot or her tears. Nobody could beat a monster like that. Somebody was saying something. She had no time to care about that. All she could think of was, I just want to get away from that monster. She could not shove away the people running in front of her. All she could do was squeeze past them and keep running. Out of my way. Out of my way. Out of my way. Why were there so many people in her way? I don't care if everyone else dies, but I don't want to die. Viviana ran with that thought in her heart. While she was ostensibly running, she was surrounded by people fleeing in all directions. Even Viviana, who was faster than the average person, was as slow as a turtle. She could not get away from the demon. Sizzling heat caressed the tips of Viviana's hair. No. She thought of the horrible way people looked when they died. I don't want to die. It was a perfectly natural thing to scream. Anyone would have thought the same thing. It was very difficult to accept one's death calmly when it loomed before you. This was more true the more suddenly death appeared in front of you. It hurts. The incredible heat meant she could not feel anything other than pain. Her brain was assaulted by unbearable agony. She realized that she would soon be dead. No, I don't want to die, Viviana thought as she burned to death. Jaldabaoth continued forward in silence as he began to feel bored. Don't run. Fight. A brave man shouted from horseback. Leonzio was the second son of a retainer in service to the Marquis. He had joined the battle in the hopes of being recognized for his swordsmanship. Around him were the men his father had placed under his command, all of whom were people who knew his abilities. The demon walked in a leisurely manner, and had left countless corpses in his wake, each of them twisted in agony. He wanted to run away, but if he did, his future would be grim and dark. All he could do was take a bet for a shining future. Having made that decision, he shouted, "Don't run," over and over again. However, his horse was a different matter. Its instinct screamed that the approaching demon was a terrifying monster, and so it wanted to flee. What would happen if a horse broke into a gallop among all these people? The answer was simple. The horse got tangled up in the crowd and fell. The people which the horse landed on screamed. No, some of them had died. Leonzio was flung from his saddle and thrown to the ground. Fortunately, he had landed on top of people, and had been spared the fate of being trampled by the fleeing mob. However, intense pain filled his arm as he tried to stand. He had sprained it when he had been thrown off his horse. He had no idea where his sword had gone. It must have been flung away by the shock of being thrown off his horse. He made to look for it, and in that moment, he was engulfed by a wave of mind-blanking pain. This was the first time Leonzio had experienced such anguish in his life. The agony stopped him from thinking. In the tatters of his pain-riven mind, the only coherent thought he could form was, why me? Someone stood atop a pile of burned human corpses. The evil lord that had been given the duty of acting as Jaldabaoth surveyed the fleeing crowds. It was a little boring. The fiery aura was not an amazing ability. All it did was inflict fire damage on the surroundings. One could greatly reduce that damage with fire-resistant spells. Of course, he had been granted the knowledge that the average soldier in this country did not possess such abilities. As a demon, he did not enjoy simply tormenting the weak. Rather, he enjoyed toying with the weaklings who thought they were very strong. That was why he hoped that such an arrogant fool would show themselves, but unfortunately there did not seem to be anyone like that. The evil Lord of Wrath stomped on a burned corpse. The innards squeezed out of it by the impact were charred in an instant. The odor of awful filled the air. The evil Lord of Wrath turned away. If it were to get serious and take to the skies, there would be many more casualties. Had these humans realized it yet? The evil Lord of Wrath held that question in his heart as he walked. Everyone watched in silence as the demon walked proudly and regally back to the Demehuman encampment. Nobody thought, what was that monster? There was no need to ask either. Even the stupidest of fools knew the answer. He was the demon emperor Jaldabaoth. The being who had trampled the holy kingdom underfoot and made the people cry rivers of tears. The demon that had caused havoc in 2 nations demonstrated a power which mankind could never overcome. He had returned to bring despair to people who were once filled with hope for victory.